The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in April 1882, carried by a stage-coach driver who looked at Fletcher Hayes with something between pity and curiosity, before tipping his hat and riding away from the modest ranch on the outskirts of Dillon, Montana. Fletcher stood on the weathered porch of his timber-framed house, the wind tugging at his dark hair as he turned the envelope over in his calloused hands. Inside was a simple note written in careful script that told him his mail-order bride would arrive in 3 weeks' time, and her name was Thea Thompson. Fletcher had spent the better part of his 26 years building something from nothing in this harsh Montana territory. His ranch stretched across 200 acres of rough grassland, where cattle grazed beneath endless skies. And though the work was brutal and the winters could kill a man, he had carved out a life here. But it was a lonely life, one marked by silent suppers and cold beds, and when his closest friend Daniel had suggested writing to a matrimonial agency back east, Fletcher had been drunk enough on whiskey to think it was a fine idea. Now, 6 months later, with the reality of a stranger coming to be his wife bearing down on him like a summer storm, he wondered what kind of fool sends for a woman he has never met. The days that followed were a blur of nervous preparation. Fletcher cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors that had not seen a proper washing in months. He whitewashed the fence around the small vegetable garden and repaired the loose board on the front steps. His foreman, an older man named Thomas with a gray beard and sharp eyes, watched these efforts with poorly concealed amusement. "Never seen you fuss over this place like a mother hen," Thomas said one afternoon as Fletcher hung new curtains in the bedroom. "She is just a woman, Fletcher. She will either like you or she will not." "I want her to feel welcome," Fletcher replied, adjusting the fabric for the third time. "This is going to be her home." Thomas nodded slowly, chewing on the stem of his pipe. "You are a good man. Any woman would be lucky to have you. Just do not forget that you are taking a chance on her too. You know nothing about this Thea Thompson, except that she was willing to come out here alone." Fletcher had thought about that plenty. What kind of woman agrees to marry a stranger and travel halfway across the country to do it? The matrimonial agency had provided only the barest details in their correspondence. Thea was 23 years old, educated, without family ties and seeking a fresh start in the West. That was all. No photograph, no description of her appearance or temperament. For all Fletcher knew, she could be running from something terrible, or perhaps she was simply desperate. Either way, he had made a promise, and Fletcher Hayes was not a man who broke his word. The morning Thea was due to arrive, Fletcher woke before dawn and dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit he had not worn since the territorial governor had visited Dillon 2 years prior. The suit felt stiff and foreign after months in work shirts and denim, but he wanted to make a good impression. He hitched his horses to the wagon and drove into town as the sun painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. Dillon was not a large town, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud when it rained. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, a schoolhouse, and the stage depot where Fletcher now waited, his stomach tight with anxiety. A few other townspeople milled about, curious to see the mail-order bride who was coming to marry the Hayes boy. Fletcher ignored their stares and focused on the horizon, watching for the dust cloud that would signal the stagecoach's approach. When it finally came rumbling into view, Fletcher's heart began to pound. The coach pulled to a stop in front of the depot, and the driver climbed down to open the door. Fletcher stepped forward, his mouth dry, as a figure emerged. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder, dressed in a traveling suit of dark blue fabric that had seen better days. But it was not her size or her clothing that stopped Fletcher in his tracks. It was the veil. A thick piece of black lace covered her entire face, hanging from the brim of her bonnet down to her collarbone, obscuring her features completely. She stood very still on the step of the coach, one gloved hand gripping the doorframe as if she might bolt back inside at any moment. "Miss Thompson." Fletcher's voice came out rougher than he intended. Yes. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the morning breeze. "Mr. Hayes." "That is right." He moved closer, extending his hand to help her down. She hesitated for a long moment before placing her fingers in his palm. Even through their gloves, he could feel her trembling. The driver unloaded a single trunk, which Fletcher hefted onto his shoulder with ease. The townspeople were whispering now, their curiosity sharpened by the unusual veil. Fletcher felt a surge of protectiveness for this strange woman who had traveled so far to meet him. "The wagon is this way," he said gently. "It is not a long drive to the ranch." Thea nodded without speaking and followed him to where his horses waited. He helped her up onto the seat, noting how carefully she arranged her skirts, how she kept her head slightly bowed as if trying to make herself invisible. Once her trunk was secured in the back, Fletcher climbed up beside her and took the reins. The ride out of town was silent except for the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip of the horses' hooves. Fletcher wanted to say something, anything to ease the obvious tension, but every opening that came to mind seemed inadequate. Finally, as they left the last buildings of Dillon behind and the open prairie stretched before them, he cleared his throat. "I hope your journey was not too difficult," he said. "It was long," Thea replied, "but I have no complaints. I have prepared the house for you. It is not fancy, but it is solid and warm. You will have everything you need." "Thank you." Another silence fell. Fletcher risked a glance at her profile, but the veil revealed nothing except the vague outline of her face beneath. He wanted to ask about it, to understand why she hid herself, but instinct told him to wait. Whatever her reasons, she would share them when she was ready. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill, the house and outbuildings nestled in a valley with the mountains rising in the distance. Fletcher had always been proud of what he had built here, but seeing it through the eyes of a stranger made him notice all the imperfections. The barn needed a new coat of paint. The corral fence sagged in places. The house, though sturdy, was plain and unadorned. "This is it," he said as they approached. "Home." Thea's head turned slowly, taking in the view. "It is beautiful," she said, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost like relief. Fletcher helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The house was small, just 3 rooms plus a loft, but he had done his best to make it comfortable. The main room served as kitchen and parlor, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. The bedroom was off to the side, and there was a small washroom that Fletcher had added last year after finally getting tired of bathing in a tin tub by the fire. "This is your room," Fletcher said, setting the trunk at the foot of the bed. "I will sleep in the loft for now. I thought we should take some time to get to know each other before making any permanent arrangements." Thea turned to face him, and even through the veil he could sense her surprise. "That is very considerate of you, Mr. Hayes." "Fletcher," he said. "Please call me Fletcher." "Then you must call me Thea." He nodded, feeling some of the tension ease. "Are you hungry? I am not much of a cook, but I can manage bacon and eggs." "That sounds wonderful," Thea said, "but perhaps I could prepare it. I would like to be useful." "You just arrived after weeks of travel," Fletcher protested. "You should rest." "I have been resting on trains and stage coaches for so long that I would welcome the chance to do something with my hands," Thea insisted. There was a note of determination in her voice that told Fletcher arguing would be pointless. "All right," he agreed. I will show you where everything is." They moved into the kitchen area, and Fletcher opened cupboards and drawers, pointing out the stores of flour and sugar, the coffee and tea, the dried goods that would see them through until the summer garden came in. Thea listened carefully, asking occasional questions in that soft voice of hers. She moved around the space with surprising ease despite the veil, and soon had eggs frying in a cast-iron skillet while bacon sizzled in another pan. Fletcher sat at the wooden table and watched her work, fascinated by the small glimpses of the woman beneath the mystery. Her hands were graceful and efficient as she cracked eggs and flipped bacon. She hummed quietly while she cooked, a tune he did not recognize but found pleasant. When she brought the plates to the table, the food was perfectly prepared, better than anything he had managed in months of solitary meals. "This is delicious," Fletcher said after the first bite. "Thank you. You are welcome." Thea sat across from him but did not eat. Fletcher paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Are you not hungry?" "I am," Thea said quietly, "but I cannot eat while wearing this veil." The obvious solution hung in the air between them. Fletcher set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "Thea, I do not know what happened to you, and I will not press you to tell me before you are ready, but I want you to know that you are safe here. Whatever is under that veil, it will not change the fact that I gave you my word to marry you and take care of you. I am a man who keeps his promises." Thea's hands, folded on the table before her, tightened until her knuckles showed white through the fabric of her gloves. "You say that now, but you have not seen." "Then show me," Fletcher said gently. "Let me prove that I mean what I say." For a long moment, Thea did not move. Fletcher could hear the clock on the mantel ticking, the wind whistling around the eaves of the house, his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then, slowly, Thea raised her hands to the pins that held the veil in place. Her fingers fumbled with the fastenings, and Fletcher resisted the urge to help her, sensing that this was something she needed to do herself. The veil came free, and Thea lifted it away from her face. Fletcher found himself looking at a woman with large dark eyes, delicate features, and skin that was marked on the left side by terrible scarring. The scars ran from her temple down to her jaw, puckered and discolored, pulling at the corner of her mouth and eye. It was clear that whatever had caused the injury had been severe, and that it had happened some time ago, for the scars were old and well-healed. Thea met his gaze for only a moment before looking away, her cheeks flushing with shame. "There," she whispered. "Now you see why I wore the veil. I understand if you wish to send me back. I should have told you before I came, but I was afraid you would refuse me, and I had nowhere else to go." Fletcher stood up from the table and walked around to where Thea sat. She flinched as he approached, as if expecting a blow or a cruel word. Instead, Fletcher knelt down so that he was at her eye level. Gently, he reached out and touched her scarred cheek with his fingertips. Thea drew in a sharp breath but did not pull away. "What happened?" Fletcher asked softly. "A fire," Thea said, her voice barely audible. 2 years ago. I was a governess for a family in Boston. Their house caught fire in the middle of the night. I got the children out safely, but I went back for the youngest, who was trapped in an upstairs room. Part of the ceiling collapsed on me." She paused, swallowing hard. "The children all survived. I was the only one hurt." "You are a hero," Fletcher said. Thea gave a bitter laugh. "That is not what people said. They said I was hideous. The family I worked for dismissed me as soon as I recovered enough to walk. They said my appearance would frighten the children. After that, I could not find work anywhere. No one wants a scarred woman in their home, teaching their children or serving their meals. I spent my savings trying to survive, but eventually I had nothing left. The matrimonial agency was my last hope." Fletcher listened to all of this with growing anger, not at Thea but at the world that had treated her so cruelly. "Those people were fools," he said firmly. "You risked your life to save a child, and they repaid you with rejection. That says everything about them and nothing about you." Thea's eyes, which had been fixed on the table, finally met his. "You truly do not mind the scars." Fletcher smiled at her, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thea, I see a woman who is brave and selfless. I see someone who cooks a better breakfast than I have had in a year. I see a person who hummed while she worked because she was happy to have something to do. The scars are just scars. They do not change who you are." Tears spilled down Thea's cheeks, tracking over both the scarred and unscarred sides of her face. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "I thought you would be disgusted." "I am not," Fletcher said. He stood and offered her his hand. "Now please eat your breakfast before it gets cold. We have plenty of time to talk about everything else, but right now you need food and rest." Thea took his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze before picking up her fork. They ate together in a comfortable silence, and Fletcher noticed that Thea kept glancing at him as if to reassure herself that he was really there, that his acceptance was real. Each time their eyes met, Fletcher smiled at her, and slowly, tentatively, Thea began to smile back. After breakfast, Fletcher showed Thea the rest of the property. They walked down to the barn where his horses nickered in greeting, past the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched in the dirt, and out to the pasture where his cattle grazed. Thea asked intelligent questions about the ranch operations, and Fletcher found himself enjoying the conversation more than he had expected. She had a quick mind and a genuine interest in learning about this new life. As the days turned into weeks, a routine developed. Thea took over the household duties, and Fletcher quickly realized that his house had never been better managed. She was an excellent cook, creative with the limited ingredients available, and she had a talent for making the simple rooms feel like a real home. She sewed new cushions for the chairs, planted flowers in boxes by the windows, and filled the evenings with conversation and laughter. Fletcher, for his part, found himself falling for this remarkable woman in ways he had not anticipated. It was not just her beauty, which he could see clearly despite the scars, or her competence, though that was certainly appealing. It was the small things, the way she sang while she worked, the way she listened when he talked about his plans for the ranch, the way she stood on the porch at sunset, watching the light paint the mountains gold, with an expression of such peace on her face that it made his heart ache. One evening, about a month after Thea's arrival, they sat on the porch together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of grass and wildflowers. Fletcher had been working up the courage all day to say what was on his mind. "Thea," he began, "I have been thinking about our arrangement." Thea turned to him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Yes. When you first arrived, I said we should take time to get to know each other before making things permanent. I think we have had that time now, and I want you to know that my feelings have not changed. In fact, they have grown stronger." He paused, searching for the right words. "I know this was supposed to be a practical arrangement, but for me it has become something more. I care about you, Thea. I want to marry you properly, not just because we made an agreement, but because I choose you. I want you to be my wife in every sense of the word." Thea was quiet for so long that Fletcher began to fear he had overstepped. Then she reached out and took his hand in hers. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "I came here expecting at best to be tolerated, at worst to be sent away in shame. Instead, I found kindness and acceptance. I found a home, and I found someone I could love." She turned to face him fully. "Yes, Fletcher, I want to marry you. I want to be your wife." Fletcher felt joy surge through him like wildfire. He pulled Thea into his arms and held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. When he drew back, he cupped her face in his hands, careful to be gentle with the scarred side, and kissed her. It was a sweet kiss, full of promise and hope, and when they finally parted, both were breathless. "We should do this properly," Fletcher said. "I will speak to the preacher in town. We can have the ceremony at the church if you would like, or here at the ranch if you prefer something more private." "Here," Thea said without hesitation. "I want to marry you here, where we built this together." They were married on a Sunday in late June, with the whole valley blooming around them. Thomas stood as Fletcher's witness, and one of the neighboring ranchers' wives, a kind woman named Martha who had befriended Thea at the general store, stood for the bride. The preacher spoke the words that bound them together, and when Fletcher lifted Thea's veil to kiss her, there were tears in both their eyes. The celebration was simple but joyful. Martha had brought a cake. Thomas contributed a bottle of whiskey that he swore was the finest in Montana, and several other neighbors stopped by with gifts and well wishes. Thea moved through it all with quiet grace, no longer trying to hide her scars, meeting people's eyes with confidence. Fletcher watched her with pride, amazed at how far she had come from the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 2 months earlier. That night, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Fletcher and Thea finally came together as husband and wife. Fletcher was gentle and patient, mindful that this was all new to Thea. He took his time, learning what made her gasp with pleasure, what made her whisper his name. They moved together in the darkness, and when it was over, Thea lay in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured. Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "Neither did I, but here we are." "Here we are," Thea agreed, and Fletcher could hear the smile in her voice. The months that followed were filled with hard work and simple pleasures. Summer gave way to autumn, and the ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Thea proved to have a natural talent with the chickens, coaxing them to lay more eggs than Fletcher had ever managed. She also started a proper garden, planting vegetables that would store well through the winter. Fletcher expanded the herd and repaired the outbuildings, working from dawn to dusk, but never so long that he missed supper with his wife. As winter approached, they prepared the house for the cold months ahead. Fletcher chopped wood until they had a massive pile stacked against the side of the barn. Thea preserved vegetables and fruits, filling the cellar with jars that gleamed like jewels in the dim light. They worked side by side, partners in every sense, and their bond deepened with each passing day. It was in November, when the first snow was falling softly outside the windows, that Thea told Fletcher she was pregnant. They were sitting by the fire, Thea mending one of his shirts while Fletcher oiled his saddle, when she set down her needle and thread and spoke. "Fletcher, I have something to tell you." He looked up at the serious tone in her voice. "What is it?" Thea's hand went to her stomach in an unconscious gesture. "I am going to have a baby in the spring, I think." For a moment Fletcher could not speak. Joy and fear warred within him. Joy at the thought of a child, of becoming a father, of seeing Thea grow round with their baby. Fear of all the things that could go wrong, of the dangers of childbirth, especially out here so far from a doctor. But when he looked at Thea's face and saw the hope and happiness there, the joy won. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. "Thea, that is wonderful. You are wonderful." Thea laughed, a sound of pure delight. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can hardly stand it," Fletcher admitted. "Yes, I am happy. So very happy." They held each other close while the snow fell outside and the fire crackled in the hearth. Fletcher thought about how much his life had changed since he had opened that letter from the matrimonial agency. He had expected a convenient arrangement, a solution to his loneliness. What he had found instead was love, real and deep and transformative. Thea had brought light into his life, and now she was giving him the gift of a family. The winter was long and cold, but inside the ranch house there was warmth and love. Fletcher became increasingly protective of Thea as her pregnancy progressed, insisting she rest more and work less. Thea tolerated his fussing with patient amusement, though she drew the line when he suggested she should not go out to feed the chickens. "Fletcher, I am pregnant, not made of glass," she said firmly. "I will not spend the next 5 months sitting in a chair doing nothing." "I just want you to be safe," Fletcher protested. "I know, and I love you for it," Thea said, softening. "But I need to stay active. The doctor in town said so when I went for my examination. A little work is good for me and the baby." Fletcher had to concede the point, though he still watched her like a hawk whenever she ventured outside. Thomas found the whole thing hilarious and took great pleasure in teasing Fletcher about becoming a nervous father before the child was even born. "You are going to drive that poor woman mad," Thomas said one day as they worked on repairing a section of fence. "She is strong, Fletcher. She survived a burning building. I think she can handle feeding some chickens." "I know," Fletcher admitted. "I just cannot help myself. Every time I think about something happening to her or the baby, I feel like I cannot breathe." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "That is love, son. It makes fools of us all, but you have to trust her to know her own limits. She will tell you if she needs help." Fletcher took the advice to heart and tried to ease back on his hovering, though it was not easy. Fortunately, Thea seemed to understand his fears and made an effort to reassure him. She let him help her with tasks that were becoming difficult as her belly grew, and she kept him informed about every change, every movement the baby made. Fletcher loved placing his hand on her stomach and feeling the small kicks and rolls, amazed that there was a tiny person in there, a person that was part of him and part of Thea. As winter gave way to early spring, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Thea sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her stitches precise and neat. Fletcher built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there was not a single splinter, then painting it with a soft white wash. Martha came by frequently, bringing gifts and advice, her own 3 children serving as proof of her expertise. "Babies are tougher than you think," she told Fletcher during one visit while Thea rested in the bedroom. "Yes, things can go wrong, but most of the time they go right. Thea is healthy and strong. She will be fine." "I hope you are right," Fletcher said. "I am," Martha said confidently. "You just make sure you have plenty of hot water and clean linens ready, and when the time comes, stay calm. The last thing Thea needs is you panicking." Fletcher promised to do his best, though privately he doubted his ability to stay calm when the woman he loved was in pain. But when the moment came, on a warm day in early May, he found a reserve of strength he had not known he possessed. Thea's labor began in the early morning, gentle contractions that gradually grew stronger. Fletcher sent Thomas riding hard for Martha and the midwife, then stayed by Thea's side, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. Thea was frightened, he could see it in her eyes, but she was also determined. "Talk to me," she gasped between contractions. "Tell me about something, anything. I need to think about something other than the pain." So Fletcher talked. He told her about the first time he had seen this valley, about the dream he had of building something that would last. He told her about his parents, who had died when he was young, and how he had promised himself he would create the family he had lost. He told her how much he loved her, how grateful he was for every day they had together, how their child was already the most precious thing in his life. Martha and the midwife arrived just as the labor was getting serious. They bustled around with efficient competence, and Fletcher was gently but firmly ushered out of the bedroom. He paced in the main room like a caged animal, starting at every cry from Thea, his hands clenched into fists. Thomas, who had stayed behind after fetching the women, sat calmly at the table drinking coffee. "She is going to be fine," Thomas said for the 10th time. "How can you be so calm?" Fletcher demanded. "Because panicking will not help anyone," Thomas replied. "Trust in your wife and trust in Martha. They know what they are doing." The hours crawled by. Fletcher wore a path in the floorboards with his pacing. Just when he thought he could not stand another minute of waiting, a new sound filled the house. A baby's cry, strong and lusty, announcing its arrival to the world. Martha appeared in the doorway, her face flushed but smiling. "Congratulations, Fletcher, you have a son." Fletcher's legs nearly gave out. "And Thea, she is tired but well. Come and meet your family." Fletcher entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Thea lay in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in one of the blankets she had sewn, was a tiny red-faced baby. Fletcher approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his son. "He is perfect," Fletcher whispered. "He has your nose," Thea said with a tired laugh, "and quite a set of lungs." Fletcher sat carefully on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Thea, drawing her close. Together they looked at their son, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, the dark fuzz of hair on his head, the way he quieted when he heard their voices. "What should we name him?" Thea asked. They had discussed names over the long winter, going back and forth on dozens of options. But now, looking at his son's face, Fletcher knew exactly what felt right. "James," he said. "After my father, James William Hayes." Thea smiled. "James William Hayes, I like that. Welcome to the world, little James." The baby made a small sound, almost like agreement, and they both laughed. Fletcher kissed Thea's temple, then carefully pressed a kiss to James's forehead. His family, his wife and son. He had never imagined he could feel this complete. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, but Fletcher would not have traded them for anything. He helped Thea however he could, changing James's nappies, walking him when he fussed, singing lullabies in his rough voice that somehow soothed the baby to sleep. Thea recovered her strength gradually, and soon the house was filled with the sounds of James's gurgles and cries, sounds that Fletcher had never realized could bring such joy. As spring turned to summer, James grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and he seemed to love being outside. Fletcher would carry him around the ranch, pointing out the horses and cattle, telling him about everything they saw. Thea would watch from the porch, a smile on her face, her hand resting on her stomach in a gesture that had become habitual. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset with James sleeping in Thea's arms, Fletcher felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Just over a year ago, he had been alone, his life defined by work and solitude. Now he had everything. A wife who loved him, a son who was healthy and strong, a home that was filled with laughter and warmth. "What are you thinking?" Thea asked, noticing his expression. "I am thinking about how much I love you," Fletcher said honestly. "I am thinking about how lucky I am." Thea leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am the lucky one. You gave me a life when I thought mine was over. You looked at me and saw a person, not just scars. You gave me a home and a family. I will never stop being grateful for that." "We gave those things to each other," Fletcher corrected gently. "You brought light into my life, Thea. You made this house a home. You gave me a son. I could never repay you for that." "Then we are even," Thea said with a smile. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. James stirred and made a small sound, and Thea adjusted him gently. Fletcher looked at his wife and son and felt his heart swell with love so strong it was almost painful. As the years passed, the Hayes ranch continued to prosper. Fletcher expanded the herd and built new outbuildings. Thea's garden grew larger each year, and she began selling her preserves and baked goods in town, earning extra money that she carefully saved. James grew from a baby into a toddler, then a young boy, full of energy and curiosity. He followed his father everywhere, learning the ranch work with the eagerness of a child who knows he is loved and valued. When James was 3, Thea became pregnant again. This time, Fletcher managed to be less overbearing, though Thea teased him that it was a near thing. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Rose, arrived on a crisp October morning. She had Thea's dark eyes and delicate features, and from the moment he held her, Fletcher was utterly smitten. "Now we have one of each," Thea said, looking at their 2 children with obvious contentment. "We are blessed," Fletcher agreed. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, seasons passing in their familiar cycle. There were hard times, certainly. A drought one summer nearly decimated the herd, and they had to make difficult decisions about which cattle to sell and which to keep. A bad storm damaged the barn roof, requiring weeks of expensive repairs. James broke his arm falling from a tree, and Sarah had a bout of fever that scared them both half to death before it finally broke. But there were far more good times than bad. Birthdays celebrated with cake and small gifts. Christmases with a tree cut from the mountains and decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments the children made. Summer evenings spent sitting on the porch, watching fireflies while James and Sarah played in the yard. Quiet moments between Fletcher and Thea, stolen kisses and whispered words of love. Thea had long since stopped wearing her veil, and while strangers sometimes stared at her scars, the people of Dillon had come to know and respect her. She was active in the church, helped at the schoolhouse when the teacher needed an extra hand, and was known for her generous spirit. The scars that had once defined her became just another part of who she was, no more remarkable than the color of her eyes or the sound of her laugh. One day when James was 8 and Sarah was 5, a new family moved to Dillon. They had a daughter, a quiet girl named Emma who had been burned in an accident and bore scars on her hands and arms. The other children at school were cruel, as children can be, and Emma's parents were at a loss for how to help her. Thea heard about the situation from Martha and immediately sought out the family. She found them at the general store, the mother looking tired and worried while Emma hid behind her skirts. Thea knelt down so she was at Emma's eye level and gently pulled back the collar of her dress to show the scars on her neck. "I know how it feels," Thea said softly. "I know how people stare and whisper, but I want you to know something important. These scars do not make you less. They are proof that you survived something terrible. They are proof that you are strong." Emma's eyes went wide. "Do people still stare at you?" "Sometimes," Thea admitted. "But the people who matter, the people who are worth knowing, they see past the scars to the person underneath. And you know what? I have a wonderful life. I have a husband who loves me, 2 beautiful children, a home I cherish. The scars did not stop any of that." Emma's mother had tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not know how much this means." "I know exactly how much it means," Thea said, standing and placing a gentle hand on the woman's arm. "Please, if Emma or you ever need someone to talk to, come to the ranch. I am always happy to help." The friendship that developed between Thea and Emma's family was one of the many joys of those years. Emma began to blossom under Thea's mentorship, growing in confidence and self-acceptance. Watching his wife help this young girl, Fletcher felt his love for Thea deepen even further. She had taken her own pain and transformed it into compassion for others. She had turned her scars into sources of strength. When James was 12 and Sarah was 9, Thea surprised Fletcher with the news that she was pregnant again. They had not planned for another child, assuming their family was complete, but the news filled them both with joy. This pregnancy was different from the others, more difficult, and Fletcher watched anxiously as Thea tired easily and struggled with sickness. "I am fine," Thea insisted when Fletcher hovered. "I am just older this time. My body is not as young as it was when I had James." "You are only 34, Fletcher protested. "That is hardly ancient." "Tell that to my aching back," Thea said with a laugh. Despite the difficulties, the pregnancy progressed well, and in late spring Thea gave birth to another son. The labor was long and hard, longer than with the other two, and Fletcher spent hours in an agony of worry. But when it was finally over and Martha brought him into the room, Thea was there with their new son in her arms, tired but triumphant. "Another boy," she said. "What should we name him?" Fletcher looked at his newest son, smaller than James or Sarah had been, but with a fierce determination evident in the way he gripped Thea's finger. "Daniel," he said, thinking of his old friend who had first suggested he write to the matrimonial agency. "Daniel Thomas Hayes." "Perfect," Thea agreed. Daniel proved to be a lively baby, demanding and loud but full of personality. James and Sarah adored their new brother, fighting over who got to hold him and help take care of him. The house was chaotic with 3 children, but it was a happy chaos, filled with laughter and love. As the children grew, Fletcher and Thea grew older together. Fletcher's dark hair gained threads of silver. Thea developed fine lines around her eyes, laugh lines earned through years of joy. They worked side by side, building a legacy for their children. The ranch expanded, and Fletcher hired additional help to manage the growing operation. Thea's garden became legendary in the area, and people came from miles around to buy her preserves and seeds. James grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He took on more and more of the work, and Fletcher began to think about the day when he could hand over the operation to his son. Sarah was bright and curious, with a talent for numbers that led Fletcher to send her to the school in Dillon, even though many people thought educating girls was a waste. And Daniel, the baby, was growing into a charming boy who could talk his way out of any trouble. One evening, when the children were all in bed and Fletcher and Thea sat on the porch as they had done countless times before, Fletcher turned to his wife and took her hand. "You remember the day you arrived?" he asked. "When you stepped off that stagecoach wearing that veil?" Thea smiled. "I remember being terrified. I was certain you would send me away the moment you saw my face. I remember thinking that you were the bravest person I had ever met," Fletcher said. "Coming all this way to marry a stranger, facing an unknown future. I was in awe of you even then." "And when you lifted the veil and smiled at me," Thea said softly, "I knew everything would be all right. That smile told me I had found a home." Fletcher brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me everything, Thea. A family, a home filled with love, a reason to wake up every morning with joy in my heart. I cannot imagine my life without you." "I feel the same way," Thea said. "You saw me when everyone else looked away. You loved me when I could not love myself. You built this life with me, Fletcher, and it is more than I ever dreamed was possible." They sat together in the gathering darkness, holding hands, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. The cattle lowing in the distance, the horses shifting in the barn, the soft hoot of an owl in the trees. These were the sounds of home, of a life well lived. As the years continued to pass, the Hayes family became a cornerstone of the Dillon community. Fletcher served on the town council and helped make decisions about schools and roads and other civic matters. Thea organized fundraisers for the church and helped families in need. Their children thrived, each finding their own path while remaining close to their parents and to each other. James married a local girl named Catherine when he was 22, and they built a house on the far edge of the ranch property. Within a year, they gave Fletcher and Thea their first grandchild, a boy they named Fletcher after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Fletcher felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. Sarah, ever independent, became a teacher at the schoolhouse in Dillon. She had a gift for working with children, especially those who struggled with learning, and she poured her energy into helping them succeed. She married a kind man named Robert who worked at the bank, and together they had twin daughters who brought chaos and joy wherever they went. Daniel, the baby, took after his mother in his compassion for others. He studied to become a doctor, traveling to the city for his education but always returning home for holidays and summers. When he finished his training, he came back to Dillon permanently and opened a practice, becoming the first resident doctor the town had ever had. Fletcher and Thea watched their children build their own lives and families with pride and satisfaction. They grew older together, their steps slower, their bodies marked by years of hard work, but their love as strong as ever. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party, inviting everyone in Dillon and the surrounding ranches. The celebration lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and toasts to the couple who had built such a remarkable life together. When Fletcher stood to give a speech, thanking everyone for coming, he looked at Thea and felt his throat tighten with emotion. 25 years ago, he said, I sent for a mail-order bride because I was lonely and foolish enough to think that was a solution. What I got instead was the love of my life. Thea, you have been my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the reason I thank God every single day. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. There was not a dry eye in the room as Thea rose and went to her husband. They embraced, and Fletcher kissed her softly, not caring that everyone was watching. This was his wife, his Thea, and he wanted the whole world to know how much he cherished her. As they grew into their 60s, Fletcher and Thea gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. James took over completely, running it with the same care and attention his father had shown. This gave Fletcher and Thea time to enjoy their grandchildren, who now numbered 7, and to pursue quieter interests. Fletcher taught his grandsons to fish and hunt. Thea taught her granddaughters to sew and cook, passing down the skills she had learned over a lifetime. They traveled a little, taking a trip to San Francisco to see the ocean, something neither of them had ever done. They visited Daniel in his office in town and marveled at the modern medical equipment he used. They attended church services and community events, their presence a reminder of the enduring power of love and commitment. One fall evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Thea turned to Fletcher with a serious expression. "You have any regrets?" she asked. "About anything in our life together?" Fletcher considered the question carefully. "I regret that I worried so much when you were pregnant with James," he said. "I wish I had been able to relax and enjoy it more. And I regret every moment I spent away from you and the children when work demanded it. But regrets about marrying you, about our life together, not a single one. You. I regret that I waited so long to stop wearing the veil," Thea said. "I wasted weeks hiding from you when I could have been fully present, But other than that, no. This life has been everything I could have hoped for and more." Fletcher took her hand and they sat in comfortable silence, a silence born of decades together. They did not need words to communicate anymore. A glance, a touch, a smile said everything that needed to be said. As winter approached, Fletcher began to feel his age in ways he had not before. His joints ached in the cold, and he tired more easily than he had in the past. Thea noticed, of course. She always noticed. "Perhaps we should spend the winter in town," she suggested. "Daniel has been after us to take the extra room in his house. It would be warmer there and closer to his office if you needed anything." Fletcher shook his head stubbornly. "I have spent my whole life on this ranch. I am not leaving it now just because I am getting old." "Fletcher Hayes, you are the most stubborn man I have ever met," Thea said, but there was fondness in her voice. "And you married me anyway," Fletcher replied with a grin. "What does that say about you?" "That I am even more stubborn than you are," Thea shot back, and they both laughed. They stayed on the ranch through the winter, and Fletcher made it through without any major difficulties. But when spring came, he felt different. Not sick, exactly, but tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. He mentioned it to Thea one morning as they sat having coffee. "I think I am slowing down," he said. "Really slowing down this time." Thea reached across the table and took his hand. "We both are. That is all right. We have earned the right to slow down." "I am not ready to stop yet," Fletcher said. "There is still so much I want to do. I want to see all the grandchildren grow up. I want to watch James pass the ranch down to young Fletcher. I want to sit on this porch with you for another 20 years at least." "Then we will do all of that," Thea said firmly. "We will take things one day at a time and enjoy every moment we have." And that was what they did. They cherished each day, finding joy in the simple routines of life. Morning coffee on the porch, evening walks around the property, visits from children and grandchildren that filled the house with noise and laughter. Quiet evenings by the fire, reading or talking or simply sitting together. One summer day, when Fletcher was 68 and Thea was 65, they decided to ride out to the spot where they had first talked about building their future together. It was a place they had not visited in years, a small rise that overlooked the valley with a view of the mountains beyond. They packed a picnic lunch and rode out on the horses they had owned for years, animals now as old and slow as their riders. When they reached the spot, they dismounted carefully and spread a blanket on the grass. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. They ate their lunch and talked about the past, remembering the early days of their marriage, the births of their children, the challenges they had overcome together. "You know what I realized," Fletcher said as they sat looking at the view. "The best decision I ever made was not sending for a mail-order bride. It was lifting your veil and choosing to see you for who you really are. That moment changed everything." Thea leaned her head on his shoulder. "I have never forgotten that moment. The fear I felt and then the relief when you smiled at me. That smile told me I was going to be all right." "We have been all right," Fletcher agreed. "Better than all right. We have been blessed." They sat for a long time holding each other, watching the play of light on the mountains. When the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, they reluctantly packed up and rode back to the ranch house. James was there waiting, a worried expression on his face. "I was getting concerned," he said. "You have been gone for hours." "We were just taking a ride," Fletcher said. "Visiting old memories." James helped them unsaddle the horses and made sure they were settled before he left. As he rode away, Fletcher and Thea stood in the barn, looking at each other in the dim light. "He worries about us," Thea said. "Of course he does," Fletcher replied. "We are his parents. It is his job to worry." They walked back to the house hand in hand. moving slowly but steadily. Inside, Thea prepared a simple supper and they ate by lamplight, talking about plans for the upcoming church social and whether they should plant more beans in the garden next year. Normal, everyday conversation that was precious precisely because it was so ordinary. That night, as they lay in bed together, Fletcher pulled Thea close and kissed her forehead. "I love you," he said, as he had said countless times over the years. "I love you too," Thea replied, her voice soft in the darkness. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for more than 40 years. When morning came, Thea woke to find Fletcher still sleeping peacefully beside her. She got up quietly, not wanting to disturb him, and went to start the coffee. But when she returned to the bedroom an hour later and he still had not stirred, she felt the first flutter of alarm. "Fletcher," she touched his shoulder gently. He did not respond. She shook him a little harder. "Fletcher, wake up." But Fletcher did not wake up. He had died in his sleep, peacefully and without pain, exactly the way he would have chosen if given the option. Thea sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand, still warm, and let the tears come. She cried for the loss of her partner, her love, the man who had seen past her scars and given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. But even through her grief, she felt gratitude. They had been given so many years together, so much love, so much joy. He had not suffered at the end. He had simply gone to sleep and not woken up, which was a blessing. She sat with him for a long time before finally going to the door and calling for James. Her son came running, and when he saw his father, his face crumpled. But he pulled himself together quickly, knowing his mother needed his strength. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like the entire territory came to pay their respects. Fletcher Hayes had been a good man, fair in his dealings, generous with his help, beloved by his family and respected by his community. The church was packed, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out into the yard. The preacher spoke of Fletcher's integrity, his love for his family, his contributions to Dylan. But it was Thea who gave the eulogy that brought everyone to tears. "My husband was a simple man," she said, standing at the front of the church with her children behind her for support. "He did not seek fame or fortune. He wanted only to build a good life, to work hard, to take care of those he loved. And he did all of that with grace and humor and unwavering commitment. He was the best man I have ever known, and I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife." She paused, her voice breaking. Sarah stepped forward and put an arm around her mother, but Thea waved her back. She needed to finish this. "When I came to Montana 43 years ago, I was running from a world that had rejected me. I wore a veil to hide my scars, convinced that no one could love me as I was. But Fletcher looked past the veil and saw me. He smiled at me and made me feel beautiful for the first time since the fire. He gave me a home, a family, a life filled with love. Everything good that I have experienced, I experienced because of him. And while my heart is broken now, I would not trade a single moment of our time together. I love you, Fletcher Hayes. I always have and I always will. Wait for me, my darling. I will find you again someday." There was not a dry eye in the church as Thea sat down. The service concluded, and Fletcher was laid to rest in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the valley he had loved. Thea stood at the graveside long after everyone else had left, saying her private goodbye. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For seeing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me. I will miss you every day, but I will be all right. Our children will take care of me, just as we taught them to take care of each other. Rest now, my love. You have earned it." In the months that followed, Thea adjusted to life without Fletcher. It was hard, harder than anything she had ever done, but she had her children and grandchildren around her, and they filled the void as much as anyone could. She stayed on the ranch, refusing to move to town despite her children's concerns. This was her home, the home she and Fletcher had built together, and she would not leave it. She continued her routines, tending her garden, feeding the chickens, preserving food for the winter. She visited with neighbors and went to church every Sunday. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew what a remarkable man he had been. 2 years after Fletcher's death, Thea was diagnosed with a weak heart. Daniel, now an experienced doctor, explained gently that there was nothing to be done except rest and avoid strain. Thea accepted the news calmly. "How long?" she asked. "Months, maybe a year," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am sorry, Mother." "Do not be sorry," Thea said, patting his hand. "I have lived a long, full life. I am ready when my time comes." She lived for another 8 months, growing gradually weaker but never losing her spirit. Her children took turns staying with her, making sure she was never alone. They brought the grandchildren to visit, and Thea delighted in their company, soaking up every moment. One spring evening, as the sun set over the mountains and painted the sky in brilliant colors, Thea asked to be helped out to the porch. James carefully carried her outside and settled her in her favorite chair, the one where she had sat with Fletcher for so many years. All of her children were there, along with their spouses and children, crowding the porch and yard. Thea looked at them all, her family, the legacy she and Fletcher had created, and felt her heart swell with love. "I want you all to know," she said, her voice weak but clear, "that I have no regrets. My life has been everything I could have hoped for. Your father gave me that, and you all have continued to give me joy every single day. Take care of each other, love each other, build good lives. That is all I ask." "We will, Mother," James said, kneeling beside her chair. "We promise." Thea smiled and closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of her family around her. Children laughing, grandchildren playing, her own children talking quietly among themselves. The sounds of life, of love, of family. She felt herself drifting, and she did not fight it. Instead, she let go, knowing she was surrounded by love, knowing she had lived well. In her final moment, she saw Fletcher clearly, standing in a field of wildflowers with his hand extended toward her, that beautiful smile on his face. The same smile he had given her when he lifted her veil all those years ago, the smile that had changed everything. "I am coming, my love," Thea whispered. And then she was gone. They buried her next to Fletcher on the hill overlooking the valley. The entire community came to mourn and to celebrate a life well lived. The preacher spoke of love that endures beyond death, of legacy measured in family and community rather than wealth or fame. But it was young Fletcher, now a man of 25 and the image of his grandfather, who gave the final words. "My grandmother used to tell me," he said, "that the scars we bear are proof that we survived." She wore her scars with pride, not because she wanted to show off her pain, but because they represented the moment her life truly began. The fire that scarred her also led her to my grandfather, to this valley, to all of us standing here today. She taught me that what the world sees as damage can actually be the doorway to something beautiful. I will carry that lesson with me always, along with the memory of her love and my grandfather's strength. They built something that will last for generations. They built it with hard work and love and commitment. And we, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, will carry it forward. That is our promise to them. The funeral ended, and slowly the crowd dispersed. But the Hayes family remained, standing together on the hill as the sun set over the valley. They held each other and remembered, and they made silent vows to honor the legacy of the couple who had started it all. Years continued to pass. The ranch flourished under James's care and was eventually passed down to young Fletcher, who ran it with the same dedication his grandfather had shown. Sarah's daughters both became teachers, continuing their mother's commitment to education. Daniel's practice grew, and he trained other doctors, ensuring that Dylan would always have quality medical care. The story of Fletcher and Thea Hayes became part of local legend, told and retold to new generations. The tale of the mail-order bride who hid her scarred face behind a veil, and the cowboy who lifted it and smiled at her, became a symbol of true love conquering prejudice and fear. Their house was preserved and remained in the family, and each generation that lived there felt the presence of the love that had filled those walls. In the cemetery on the hill, their graves stood side by side, marked by a single headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription that James had chosen. Together they built a love that death could not diminish. And on warm summer evenings, when the light hit the valley just right and the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, those who knew the story swore they could see two figures standing on the hill, holding hands and watching over the land they had loved. Whether it was memory or spirit or simply the power of a love story so strong that it left an imprint on the very earth itself, no one could say for certain. But the Hayes family knew the truth. Fletcher and Thea were still there, still together, still watching over the legacy they had created. Still proving that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a single act of acceptance, a moment of seeing past the surface to the soul beneath. And in that valley in Montana, where the mountains meet the sky and the grass grows tall and sweet, their love lived on, generation after generation, a testament to the transforming power of true acceptance and enduring devotion.